August 10, 2019, 6:30 in the morning. A corrections officer at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City opens a cell door to deliver breakfast and finds Jeffrey Epstein hanging from his bunk, a torn bedsheet wrapped around his neck. He was the most high-profile inmate in America. He had names that could shake governments. And somehow, in one of the most secure federal facilities in the country, he died completely alone and completely unmonitored. I'm James Hartwell. This is Unsealed. To understand what happened on August 10th, you need to know what happened 17 days earlier. On July 23rd, Epstein was found on the floor of his cell with a strip of bedsheet around his neck. It was ruled a suicide attempt. He was placed on suicide watch, constant monitoring, no clothing that could be used as a ligature, a special cell, eyes on him at all times. But suicide watch only lasted 24 hours. After that, he was moved to psychological observation in the facility's hospital wing for about a week. Then, on July 30th, he was returned to a regular cell in the special housing unit. The official explanation: he was assessed and cleared. But no documented psychiatric evaluation supporting that decision has ever been made public. Within days, the conditions that should have prevented his death began falling apart, one by one. Bureau of Prisons policy required that an inmate on Epstein's status have a cellmate at all times. After the July incident, he was assigned one. But on August 9th, the day before Epstein died, his cellmate was transferred to another facility. Multiple MCC staff members were notified of the transfer. Not one of them arranged a replacement. That meant Epstein spent his final night completely alone. No one in the adjacent bunk, no one to raise an alarm. The Inspector General's report confirmed this was a clear policy violation, and it wasn't an accident. It was a known transfer that no one acted on. The same day, August 8th, Epstein met with his lawyers in a private room at the prison. During that meeting, he signed a new last will and testament. Prison officials didn't learn about it until after his death. He distributed more than $250 million to at least 44 beneficiaries. He signed it 2 days before he died. The two guards assigned to Epstein's unit that night were Tova Noel and Michael Thomas. Their desks sat just 15 feet from Epstein's cell. Their job was simple: check on every inmate in the special housing unit every 30 minutes and record each check on an official log. They didn't do a single round after 10:40 p.m. For nearly 8 hours, from late evening until Epstein was found dead at 6:30 in the morning, nobody checked on him. Instead, according to federal prosecutors, the two guards sat at their desk, browsed the internet for furniture and motorcycles, walked around the common area, and during one 2-hour stretch, both appeared to have fallen asleep. But they still filled out the logs. Every 30 minutes, they signed off as if the rounds had been completed. When confronted the next morning, Noel told a supervisor, "We did not complete the 3 a.m. or 5 a.m. rounds." Thomas said, "We messed up. I messed up. She's not to blame." Both were charged with falsifying federal records. Neither went to prison. They accepted a deferred prosecution deal and left the Bureau of Prisons in 2022. The Metropolitan Correctional Center had 11 security cameras in the special housing unit where Epstein was housed. On the night he died, 10 of them were not recording. The reason, according to the Inspector General: malfunctioning hard drives. The camera failures had been ongoing since late July 2019, and nobody fixed them. The one camera that was operational didn't cover Epstein's cell tier. It showed a hallway, a staircase, and part of the common area. When then Attorney General William Barr said he had personally reviewed the footage and confirmed no one entered Epstein's area, he was basing that conclusion on this single, limited camera angle. But CBS News forensic analysts who examined the footage found it couldn't definitively show whether anyone accessed Epstein's tier. They also discovered the video appeared to be two separate segments stitched together, not raw footage as the government claimed. A cursor and on-screen menu visible in the video suggested it was a screen recording, not a direct export from the prison's DVR system. The DOJ had footage from 147 cameras covering the 24 hours around Epstein's death. Only a fraction has ever been released. On August 11th, New York City's chief medical examiner Barbara Sampson conducted a 4-hour autopsy. Her conclusion: death by suicide, specifically hanging by bedsheet. But that conclusion has been contested from the beginning. Epstein's family hired Dr. Michael Baden, one of the most experienced forensic pathologists in America, to observe the autopsy. Baden found 3 fractures in Epstein's neck. 2 on the thyroid cartilage and 1 on the hyoid bone. He stated publicly that in over 1,000 jail hangings he'd reviewed across 50 years, he had never seen 3 fractures like that in a suicide. He said the injuries were, in his words, far more consistent with homicidal strangulation. Baden also noted that the ligature mark on Epstein's neck was in the center, not under the jaw as typical in hangings, and was thinner than the bedsheet found with the body. He reported blood on Epstein's neck, but none on the bedsheet itself. The medical examiner stood by her finding. Other experts weighed in on both sides. Some agreed the fractures were highly unusual. Others said hyoid fractures can occur in hangings, particularly in older individuals. The Inspector General's 2023 report sided with the suicide conclusion, but Epstein's brother Mark has maintained since day one that his brother was murdered and says new autopsy findings expected in 2026 will support that claim. When guards finally entered Epstein's cell that morning, they found him with an orange cloth knotted to his bunk, his body in a kneeling position. His cell contained an excessive amount of prison linens, sheets, blankets, clothing that should have been confiscated, and multiple nooses made from torn fabric. A handwritten note was found among his belongings. According to emails between investigators released in the January 2026 DOJ file dump, one official assessed that the note did not appear to be a suicide note. The documents don't elaborate on why, and this observation doesn't overturn the official ruling, but it adds another layer to a case already filled with contradictions. And then there's how the body left the building. According to interview notes in the 2026 files, jail staff created a decoy, using boxes and sheets to simulate a body, which they loaded into a white medical examiner's van. The media followed that van. Meanwhile, Epstein's actual body was placed into a black vehicle that departed the facility unnoticed. It would be easy to treat Epstein's death as a one-off disaster, but the Inspector General's report made clear this was systemic. The MCC had long-standing problems with staffing, camera maintenance, inmate supervision, and record-keeping. Guards were overworked. One of the officers that night was on his 5th straight day of overtime. The other was working a mandatory double shift, 16 hours. An unrecorded, unmonitored phone call was allowed the evening before Epstein's death, in violation of Bureau of Prisons policy. His cell was never searched. If it had been, the excess linens and improvised nooses would have been found. The tier where he was housed held up to 14 inmates, but only 3 voluntarily spoke to investigators. The MCC was eventually shut down in 2021, not because of Epstein, but because the problems documented in his case were symptoms of a facility that had been failing for years. So let's separate fact from speculation. Here's what we know. Epstein was found dead in his locked cell on August 10, 2019. The medical examiner ruled suicide. The Inspector General confirmed suicide. The FBI found no evidence of criminal involvement by outside actors. 2 guards falsified records and were charged. 10 of 11 cameras in his unit were not recording. His cellmate was removed the day before with no replacement. Here's what we don't know. Why suicide watch was lifted after just 24 hours. Why no one replaced the cellmate. Why the cameras had been broken for weeks with no repair. Why only a fraction of the 147 camera feeds have been released. What the full content of his final note said. And why, despite all of this documented negligence, no senior official at the Bureau of Prisons was ever held accountable. The official answer is suicide enabled by incompetence. Whether you accept that answer depends on how many coincidences you're willing to believe happened in the same building, on the same night, to the same man. He died in a cell. But the real question is, how did a college dropout with no degree become one of the most connected financiers in the world? How did a math teacher end up with a private island, a private jet, and the phone numbers of presidents and princes? In our next episode, we trace Epstein's impossible rise, from a classroom in Brooklyn to the highest levels of global power. And we ask the question nobody has ever fully answered. Where did the money actually come from? Subscribe to Unsealed, because these files were sealed for a reason.